wasn't just another tuned motorcycle. Pops Yoshimura's 133 horsepower Suzuki GS1000 shattered the limits of production racing and rewrote what fast meant in 1978. That year, factory bikes struggled to hit 100 horsepower, but a brilliant ex-aircraft mechanic named Hideo Pops Yoshimura took Suzuki's new GS1000 and performed radical surgery. This machine didn't just win races, it forged the most successful partnership in motorsport history, sparking a 40-year dynasty of utter dominance. But to understand how this legend was born, we have to rewind to the workshop floor, because the engine story starts not with a corporate mandate, but with one man's obsession with aircraft-level precision. The year 1978 wasn't just another season in American motorcycle racing, it was the year that everything changed. All because an ex-aircraft mechanic from Japan decided that good enough wasn't good enough. Hideo Pops Yoshimura wasn't your typical motorcycle tuner. During World War II, he was trained as an aircraft mechanic. He worked on machines where precision wasn't just about performance, it was about survival. When the war ended, American servicemen brought their British bikes to Japan for repairs. Pops discovered something that would define his life. Motorcycles were just aircraft engines with wheels. By 1978, the motorcycle racing world had settled into comfortable patterns. European manufacturers dominated with exotic materials and limited production specials. American riders adapted what they could get. They made do with compromises between reliability and speed. Then Pops Yoshimura tuned a Suzuki GS1000, and Steve McLaughlin rode it to a victory circle at the Daytona Superbike race. Suddenly, the rulebook was out of the window. But this wasn't just another race victory. This was a declaration of war against conventional thinking. It was engineered with the mathematical precision of someone who understood that small improvements compound into revolutionary advantages. The GS1000 itself was already impressive. It was Suzuki's answer to Honda's CB750. The bike packed more displacement and better handling into a package that promised to challenge everyone. But in stock form, it was still playing by everyone else's rules. Pops had different ideas. The stock GS1000 produced a respectable 87 horsepower from its 997cc inline-4 engine. The engine featured double overhead cams operating 2 valves per cylinder. It used a reliable 5-bearing crankshaft with roller bearings on the mains. The bike weighed 513 pounds dry and could reach 135 miles per hour in stock form. These were solid numbers for 1978, but Pops saw potential that others missed. What happened next plays like a corporate thriller. The stakes were measured in championship points. The weapons were camshafts and carburetors. Suzuki's executives faced a brutal reality in the late 1970s. They were the new kids fighting established European racing royalty and Honda's growing dominance. Traditional approaches weren't working. They needed something radical, something that would prove their engineering wasn't just capable, it was superior. The decision to partner with Yoshimura wasn't just about hiring a tuner, it was about embracing a philosophy that would have terrified most manufacturers. Push every component to its absolute limit, then find ways to push it further. The GS1000 project brief was deceptively simple. Take Suzuki's new flagship and make it unbeatable in AMA superbike racing. But Pops understood what that really meant. He wasn't just building a faster motorcycle, he was creating a new category of machine that would force everyone else to rethink their approach completely. The target was ambitious, over 130 horsepower from a production-based engine. In 1978, that number was fantasy territory. Most race bikes struggled to reach 100 horsepower. The fastest muscle cars were celebrating 150 horsepower per litre. Pops was aiming for numbers that belonged in aircraft, not motorcycles. The Yoshimura workshop became a laboratory. Aircraft engineering principles met motorcycle performance. Every component was analyzed not just for what it did, but for how it could be improved. Poured and polished work became geometric art. Valve timing became mathematical precision. Weight reduction became an obsession. But the real breakthrough wasn't any single modification, it was the systematic approach. While other tuners focused on dramatic single changes, Pops orchestrated dozens of incremental improvements that worked together exponentially. The business risk was enormous. Suzuki was betting their American racing reputation on an untested partnership with a relatively small tuning shop. If the project failed, it would validate critics who claimed Japanese manufacturers couldn't compete with European racing expertise. Success would rewrite the competitive landscape entirely. What emerged from the Yoshimura workshop in late 1977 wasn't just a modified Suzuki, it was a machine that redefined the relationship between production motorcycles and pure performance. The heart of the transformation was cylinder head work that approached sculpture. Pops believed that at 10,000 RPM, the cylinder must be filled with a gas-air mixture in just 0.012 seconds. That's 83.3 times per second. Intake port mixture velocity reaches more than 280 miles per hour. At those speeds, every surface imperfection becomes a performance penalty. The porting work alone took weeks per head. Each intake port was hand-shaped to eliminate turbulence. The work created flowing lines that guided the fuel-air mixture like a precision instrument. The exhaust ports received equal attention. They created smooth pathways that let spent gases escape without restriction. But mechanical beauty was just the beginning. The valve work pushed boundaries that most engine builders considered risky. Stock GS1000 had 38mm intake valves and 32mm exhaust valves. The Yoshimura GS1000 had 39mm intake and 34mm exhaust valves. Total valve area increased by 8.5%. Those millimeters translated into measurable power increases, but they also required supporting modifications throughout the valve train. Custom camshafts with radical timing provided the aggressive valve events needed for high RPM power. Lightweight racing buckets replaced the stock tappet system. This reduced reciprocating mass while improving reliability at extreme speeds. The camshaft specifications tell the story of controlled aggression. Intake opens 26 degrees before top dead center and closes 56 degrees after bottom dead center. Exhaust opens 56 degrees before bottom dead center and closes 26 degrees after top dead center. Intake lift is 10.4mm. Exhaust lift is 9.7mm. These weren't subtle modifications. They were radical departures from stock specifications that transformed the engine's personality completely. At the carburetor end, Pop specified 31mm Cayenne CR racing carburetors with completely smooth bores. Unlike street carburetors with protruding jets and fittings that created turbulence, the CR carbs provided unrestricted airflow directly into those perfectly ported cylinder heads. The carburetor choice was critical for another reason. The CR carburetors had no idle circuit, only a slow speed circuit. They were designed purely for racing use. A mechanic could reject the carbs without removing them from the motorcycle. That allowed quick changes at the racetrack between practice sessions. The compression ratio was increased to 11.5 to 1 using custom flat-top pistons. These weren't forged racing pistons, which were controversial. Fujiro Yoshimura believed cast pistons expanded more evenly than forged pistons and weighed less. The cast piston design allowed very small piston-to-cylinder tolerances of just 0.0015 inches while minimizing blow-by and oil consumption. Each piston used only 2 rings instead of the typical 3. The top ring was hard-chromed cast iron for durability. The slipper skirt design reduced contact area and friction. Wrist pins were nitrided to prevent seizure with the connecting rod small end. Success brought new problems. By mid-1978, the Yoshimura team was facing a crisis that threatened to end their championship ambitions before they really began. The issue wasn't power. The engine was producing the target numbers and more. The problem was keeping that power reliable enough to finish races. High-performance modifications that worked perfectly in sprint races began failing during longer events. This revealed fundamental limitations in the production-based components. The cam chain problems were particularly vicious. The race motor would violently change speeds, both accelerating and decelerating. This created waves in the roller cam chain, which could slightly alter the cam timing and send the valves crashing into the pistons. Traditional solutions didn't work. Modifying the automatic tensioner helped initially, but the problem still surfaced in long-endurance events. At the 1978 AFM 6-hour, the Yoshimura team was in contention for the win. Then, the GS1000 dropped its valves in the 4th hour. The engineering response reveals Pops' aircraft mechanic background. Instead of accepting the limitation, the team completely re-engineered the cam chain system. They welded aluminum plates to the cylinder head and installed an additional idler roller borrowed from the GS750. When that wasn't enough, they added a second roller from a Kawasaki KZ1000. This created a system that was mechanically impossible in stock form but absolutely necessary for racing reliability. Each modification cascaded into other requirements. The additional rollers required a longer cam chain. They used 61 links instead of the standard 60. The tensioner slippers needed machining to contact only with the chain rollers, not the side plates. Even the chain itself required modifications. Link plates were polished to eliminate wear-causing burrs. The cam chain modifications highlight the systematic nature of Yoshimura's approach. What started as a simple tensioner problem required redesigning the entire upper engine timing system, but the solution worked. Once implemented, cam chain failures became a thing of the past. The team also discovered that rubber tensioner slippers wore quickly under racing conditions. Steel tensioner slippers lasted longer but transmitted more noise and vibration. The final solution used modified steel slippers with precise contact points that balanced durability with acceptable noise levels. Power without the ability to transfer it to the rear wheel is useless. By late 1978, the Yoshimura team was discovering that their engine modifications had overwhelmed every other component in the drivetrain. The clutch problems were the most frustrating because they seemed to have no single solution. According to Fujio Yoshimura, the GS1000's clutch hub wouldn't have lasted another lap at Daytona in 1978. That was the bike's first victory. The massive torque loads were literally tearing the clutch basket apart. They were shearing the rivets that held everything together. Traditional racing clutch modifications provided temporary improvements but no permanent solution. Heavier springs, aftermarket plates, and different oils all helped briefly. The fundamental problem was that the clutch was designed for a stock engine producing 87 horsepower. It wasn't designed for a racing motor making 133 horsepower with violent power delivery characteristics. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Suzuki's RG500 Grand Prix program had developed specialized clutch components for their two-stroke race bikes. Suzuki engineers built a clutch hub out of steel instead of aluminum. They also produced special clutch plates developed for the RG500. The trick plates were coated with paper fiber friction material, but the real innovation was in the plate design itself. Instead of solid engagement tabs that transmitted shock loads directly, the new plates used folded tabs. These tabs were cut thinner than the plate itself and folded over. This created built-in dampening that absorbs shock loads. The steel clutch hub solved the durability problem. The dampened clutch plates eliminated the harsh engagement that had been destroying components. Together, these modifications transformed the clutch from a brittle weak point into a system capable of handling the engine's aggressive power delivery. The clutch solution also required changes to the clutch springs. 6 heavy-duty damper springs replaced the stock combination of 3 heavy and 3 light damper springs. This provided more consistent clamping force while reducing the variation in engagement feel that had made the bike difficult to launch consistently. The GS1000 transmission was adequate for street use, but the Yoshimura engine's power delivery and the demands of close ratio racing exposed weaknesses that required complete reconstruction. The Yoshimura close ratio transmission used chrome moly alloy gears throughout. Gear teeth were polished ground rather than cut because the hard material was too tough for conventional machine tools. Polished grinding provided a superior surface finish that reduced friction and increased durability. The close ratios kept the engine in its peak power band more effectively, but they also required a more precise shifting technique. Gear dogs were undercut for more positive engagement. All tolerances were minimal to avoid gear slump or driveline snatch. The transmission modifications weren't just about gear ratios. The shift mechanism itself was upgraded with a racing shift linkage that provided more precise control. The shift drum and forks received careful attention to ensure smooth, reliable shifting under racing conditions. Even the transmission oil became a performance consideration. The Yoshimuras experimented with different viscosities and formulations to find the optimal balance between gear protection and reduced friction losses. While magazines debated the technical merits of the Yoshimura modifications, the streets had already delivered their verdict. The GS1000 wasn't just fast, it was rewriting the rules of what was possible on 2 wheels. The drag racing culture of the late 1970s revolved around muscle cars and their quarter-mile times. A well-tuned Corvette or Camaro Z28 might run high 13s on a good day. The fastest pro-stock cars were breaking into the 12-second range with massive engines and unlimited budgets. Then riders started showing up to street races with Yoshimura modified GS1000s. Everything changed. In an era when the fastest muscle cars were posting quarter-mile times in the high 13-second range, the GS1000 was running consistent 12 seconds with an experienced rider. The technique for launching became part of motorcycle folklore. Get the bike into the power band around 5,000 RPM. Then use the massive torque to break the rear wheel loose just enough to prevent wheeling while still accelerating harder than anything else on 4 wheels. Muscle car drivers watched in disbelief as motorcycles that looked small and fragile simply disappeared into the distance. The street racing success wasn't limited to straight line acceleration. The GS1000's handling advantages became apparent on winding roads where muscle cars couldn't use their power effectively. Riders discovered they could maintain higher speeds through corners while still having acceleration that no car could match on the straights. But the street success also created problems. Insurance companies began to notice higher claim rates for modified GS1000s. Police departments started specifically targeting the bikes at known racing locations. The combination of performance and visibility made the Yoshimura bikes both famous and infamous. The underground racing scene developed its own technical modifications based on Yoshimura's work. Aftermarket companies began offering Yoshimura-style modifications for GS1000s. This created a secondary market of performance parts that spread the influence of Pops' engineering far beyond the official racing program. The 1979 season marked the beginning of what would become the most successful partnership in motorcycle racing history. The partnership was built around a machine that combined Japanese engineering precision with American racing aggression. Wes Cooley won the 1979 AMA Superbike Championship while riding Yoshimura Suzuki GS1000s, but the championships themselves only tell part of the story. The real achievement was how completely the Yoshimura GS1000 changed expectations about what production-based motorcycles could accomplish. The performance numbers were staggering for the era. The engine produced 133.54 brake horsepower at 10,000 RPM and 76.64 foot-per-pounds of torque at 8,000 RPM. These measurements were taken at the camshaft sprocket on the Yoshimura dyno. The bike's power-to-weight ratio of just 4.42 pounds per horsepower compared to a stock GS1000's 8.14 pounds per horsepower. This revealed the comprehensive nature of the modifications. Every component had been optimized for racing. The close ratio transmission used chrome moly gears that were polished ground rather than cut. This provided strength and precision that could handle the engine's violent power delivery. The suspension combined Kayaba gas-charged shocks with extended air forks that provided 270 possible adjustment combinations. Even the braking system reflected aircraft-level engineering precision. The front system used Lockheed calipers with drilled discs that managed heat while providing fade-free stopping power. The rear brake was completely re-engineered with a floating caliper that eliminated the suspension binding common in production motorcycles. Cooley's championship campaign wasn't just about raw speed. The 1979 season required consistency and reliability across multiple tracks with different characteristics. The Yoshimura GS1000 proved it could adapt to everything from high-speed ovals to tight, technical road courses. The championship also validated Suzuki's decision to partner with Yoshimura. Other Japanese manufacturers had tried to develop competitive superbike programs using internal resources or traditional racing contractors. None achieved the combination of performance and reliability that the Yoshimura partnership delivered. Cooley's riding style complemented the bike's characteristics perfectly. He understood how to use the engine's massive torque advantage while managing the aggressive power delivery that could catch inexperienced riders off guard. His technique became the template for how to extract maximum performance from high-power production-based race bikes. With great power comes great heat. The Yoshimura GS1000's 133 horsepower output created thermal management challenges that pushed cooling technology to its limits. The problem wasn't just the additional power. It was the concentration of that power in an air-cooled engine designed for much lower outputs. The stock cooling fan and airflow patterns that worked perfectly for 87 horsepower became completely inadequate when power increased by 50%. Pops' solution combined multiple approaches with typical aircraft mechanic thoroughness. The air passages between the stock cylinder bores were enlarged for more airflow. Quarter-inch holes were drilled through cylinder and cylinder head fins to eliminate stagnant air pockets between fins and to induce cooling air turbulence. Holes were drilled into the cylinder head around each spark plug to increase the surface area available for heat transfer. This modification required careful positioning to avoid weakening the head structure while maximizing cooling effectiveness. But the real breakthrough was surface treatment technology borrowed from military applications. All engine cases, cylinders, cylinder heads, and cam covers were treated with CalGuard. This was a grey-black coating originally developed to protect weapons carried by underwater demolition crews from the effects of salt water. The CalGuard process involved blasting parts with aluminum oxide to increase surface area by 500%. Then a coating of 0.0003 inches thick was applied that followed every microscopic contour. The coating helped dissipate heat into the surrounding air or airstream, causing a typical engine to run 15% cooler. Oil cooling provided the final piece of the thermal management puzzle. The full-flow oil cooler diverted oil through an aluminum radiator mounted on the frame down tubes. This provided consistent lubrication temperatures even during sustained high RPM operation. The oil cooler system required careful engineering to avoid creating new problems. The oil lines had to be positioned to avoid damage during crashes while providing adequate flow capacity. The cooler itself needed protection from road debris while maintaining maximum exposure to cooling airflow. Temperature monitoring became critical during development. The team used multiple temperature sensors to track cylinder head, oil, and exhaust gas temperatures during testing. This data helped optimize the cooling modifications and establish operating limits for different racing conditions. The Yoshimura GS1000 success wasn't limited to American racing circuits. International competition provided the ultimate test of whether the engineering philosophy behind the bike could compete against the world's best. The bike won the Australian Castrol 6-hour race in 1979. This victory was significant because it proved the bike's endurance capabilities against strong local competition. The Australian race also demonstrated that the cooling and reliability modifications worked effectively in different climatic conditions. In Europe, Yoshimura GS1000 powered Formula 1 bikes won the Formula TT World Championship. Graham Crosby rode those bikes to victory in 1980 and 1981. The European success was particularly important because it validated the Yoshimura approach against traditional European racing expertise. But the most significant victory came at Japan's Suzuka circuit. The Suzuka 8-hour endurance race was considered the most demanding motorcycle race in the world. The combination of high speeds, challenging corners, and extreme duration tested every aspect of motorcycle design and preparation. Cooley co-rode to victory in the Suzuka 8-hour race in 1978, sharing a Yoshimura Suzuki GS1000 with Mike Baldwin. He repeated this success in 1980, sharing another Yoshimura Suzuki with Graham Crosby. These victories were particularly significant because they happened on Suzuki's home turf, against competition that included factory efforts from Honda, Yamaha, and Kawasaki. The Suzuka victories validated not just the bike's performance, but the entire Yoshimura approach to racing preparation. The 8-hour race format required perfect reliability combined with competitive speed. Any weakness in the bike's design or preparation would be exposed during the grueling race distance. The technical lessons learned at Suzuka fed back into the American program. This created a continuous improvement cycle that kept the Yoshimura bikes ahead of rapidly evolving competition. Each international victory validated the fundamental engineering approach while revealing new areas for development. The international success also established Yoshimura as a global brand. Racing victories in Australia, Europe, and Japan demonstrated that the company's expertise wasn't limited to American racing conditions. This reputation helped establish the aftermarket business that would sustain the company for decades. By 1981, the Yoshimura Suzuki GS1000 had accomplished something unprecedented. It had proven that production-based motorcycles could be transformed into world-beating race machines without sacrificing reliability. The partnership produced 14 AMA Superbike championships over 4 decades. This made it the most successful collaboration in motorcycle racing history. But the real impact extends far beyond championship trophies. Perhaps most importantly, the GS1000 proved that innovation could come from unexpected sources. Pops Yoshimura wasn't backed by a major manufacturer's research budget. He succeeded through systematic thinking, careful execution, and the willingness to challenge conventional wisdom. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that, hit subscribe for more videos like this. It really helps us out. See you next time.